Oh, yeah,
Always caught on mute.
yeah,
Hi, Tudor, you're right. How's it going?
yeah. Good, thanks. How have you? How's it been today? Have you had a chance to have a look at the things on the festival?
Yeah. So I've been involved in the campaign hub, and that was great. A whole bunch of environmental groups got together and formed a little virtual stall area where people could come and visit and find out what we're all doing. So that was great. Got quite a few people along to join us and had some good conversations. So it's all
Great.
good.
Yeah, it's been really good I'm really glad you met some people through that. So now you're. I mean, I'll let you introduce yourself. But I mean, I know you through many things we've done together in Manchester. Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself and then give a little background about what it is you want to talk about today.
Yeah, very happy to. Thank you. So my name's Ali. I'm a volunteer with Manchester Friends of the Earth. Been involved for many years now, campaigning on a range of issues, but particularly climate change. I've also been involved with the Manchester Climate Change Partnership and some of the work that Manchester is doing as a city to take action on climate change. I think some of you may have heard from the partnership and the agency earlier in a session earlier this afternoon. I guess one of the things that we're looking at is what climate change means for Manchester particularly, and what kind of ambition we need to have here locally. So I was hoping to do a bit of a talk about that now to share some of the background to that, and particularly about the concept of something called carbon budgets, which you may not have heard of before, but is an important way of thinking about the scale of the challenge and what we need to do on climate change.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's an interesting term, which I know from in Manchester we talked a lot about carbon budgets, possibly because we've got the Tyndall Centre right here on our doorstep, and they do a lot of work into that. And so yeah, I've definitely heard the term before. So yeah, maybe you want to explain for everyone, for those who possibly don't know.
Yeah, I can definitely give that a go. I've got a presentation, so I'm going to try and share a few slides. Now, this may or may not work technically, but we'll give it a go. So I'm going to share this screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see some slides. So has that come up now?
Yeah, I've got that.
Great. So this is a little run through of trying to explain a bit more about carbon budgets, what they are and why they matter. So apologies in advance for some graphs, into graphs. I've got a science background, so but I won't dwell too much on them. I guess we've all seen these kind of graphs about climate change before, looking at the increase in global temperatures over time, and that being linked to the increase in global carbon emissions. So I think everyone's kind of probably heard about that and aware of the background and the science on it. We've started to see the effects as well. So this climate crisis isn't just about what's happening around the world, although we've seen many examples of the impacts of climate change happening. These are some headlines from the last 3 years. So looking at America in 2018, from the storms of record ferocity and apocalyptic damage, thousands of deaths in America, to last year being looking at the flooding that's happening in Indonesia and Mozambique, and this year the bushfires which burned for over 240 days in Australia. So those impacts are growing more and more common and frequent and severe, but it's not just overseas, it's also close to home. So here's some pictures from Salford in 2016 and from Saddleworth Moors when they were on fire a couple of years ago. So these issues are all coming to closer to home, and we all know that we need to take serious action. But how much action do we need to take? What does that look like for Manchester? That's where the concept of local carbon budgets comes in. So this picture of the Earth, the blue marble, it's about 50 years old now. Before that, no one had seen this before, and it really kind of highlights the beauty and fragility of the planet, but also the really thin layer of protective atmosphere that keeps us safe from the ravages of outer space, from radiation, from the extreme cold, and we rely on this atmosphere to keep us safe and for the air that we breathe, for the oxygen that we breathe. And so what scientists can do, though, is look at that atmosphere and say, well, how much carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, can we afford to emit into the atmosphere and still keep global temperatures safe? Because there's a clear link between those greenhouse gas emissions and global temperatures. And so very clever scientists, much more clever than me, have worked all this out and calculated a global carbon budget. That's the amount of carbon we can afford to emit as a society as a whole across the world to keep temperatures below this safe threshold of 2 degrees, and to aim for 1.5 degrees increases in global temperatures. So carbon budget is really like a bit like a pie, and that pie, that carbon budget can be shared out in different ways between different countries and then down to different cities. So the Tyndall Centre, as Tudor mentioned earlier, Tyndall Centre is based in Manchester. They've done a lot of analysis about this, and they've taken the global pie and split it down into smaller and smaller slices and see what our slice in Manchester is. So the question is, what's actually included in a carbon budget? And I think that depends is the answer. In terms of the carbon budgets we're talking about, they definitely include things like heating our homes, powering our workplaces, how we get around on the ground, so cars, public transport. In terms of aviation and shipping, I put a question mark against that, and I'll come back to those shortly. And in terms of the other greenhouse gas emissions like methane from cows, often, and refrigerants, which are other greenhouse gases called HFCs, those aren't currently included in our carbon budget. Our carbon budget is about carbon dioxide, particularly related to energy. So that's kind of scope of what we're talking about. So here's another little chart. Charts are all great, aren't they? What the experts at Tyndall Centre have done is look at the global carbon budget, which I mentioned earlier, for energy, and then split that down into countries and said, what's our fair share as a UK? And that's about 0.6% of the global carbon budget for energy. Clearly, the UK has much more of an impact than that because of all the stuff we consume and produce, that is produced elsewhere. So that isn't included in this budget. So realistically speaking, our contribution globally is much bigger than this, but this is purely looking at energy emissions for stuff that we use for heating, power and ground transport, and aviation, shipping. So this is the UK's budget, and the way that it's split out is roughly half for heating, power and ground transport, and roughly half for aviation and shipping. And that's based on various assumptions about the amount of emissions that will come from aviation and shipping in the future. This roughly half, 55% for heating, power and ground transport, then can be split down to different local areas. And from our local area in Manchester, that's roughly 0.5% of the UK's emissions. And that gives us a carbon budget of roughly 15 million tonnes of CO2. So that's this area here, and that's split between different years. So that 15 million tonnes of CO2 is our slice of the global pie for energy emissions, energy carbon dioxide emissions. If you look at the graph of how that looks, this is showing how those emissions would be effectively emitted over time. So this is showing current emissions, actually from 2017, so it's not quite up to date. We're just about to update this. So currently we're emitting about 2 million tonnes of CO2 a year as a city. So if our carbon budget is 15 million tonnes, that means if we carry on as we are, we're going to burn through that budget in about 7 or 8 years. But the carbon budget of 15 million tonnes needs to last us to 2100. So that means making rapid reductions in carbon emissions, roughly halving emissions every 5 years, and effectively cutting our emissions by around between 12 and 15% every year. So that's quite ambitious reductions in carbon, but we know we can do it. And that's the positive story out of this. That is really ambitious and really hard, but all the solutions to that are out there. So just looking very quickly at what kind of action that means. This has been some analysis that's been done by a consultancy called Anthesis, and they looked at how could we meet this really ambitious carbon budget. And these are some of the things that we'd have to do locally. So if you look at this list, these are all things we know how to do. There's nothing extraordinary here. It's just a matter of doing more of the stuff that we know about and doing it faster. So more solar panels on homes and on commercial roofs, increasing the amount of onshore wind and potentially biomass generation, although there's concerns about that in the future. Making sure our homes are more insulated. Right now, our homes are very leaky, which is a big waste of money and of energy and of carbon dioxide. So insulating our homes will make them cheaper to run and warmer to live in and healthier to live in. Switching our heating from gas to electricity is another big area. Electricity, the amount of carbon emitted from electricity is rapidly decreasing over time as we switch to renewables. That's going to continue changing, and so switching from gas to electricity for heating will be a carbon saving. There's a few other things here which I won't go into detail because I know that time's short. One of the key things to mention, though, is around aviation. So I mentioned that roughly half our UK carbon budget is allocated to aviation emissions. That's quite a lot, and shipping, obviously. But aviation emissions, this assumes that they won't increase at all to 2030 and then fall to zero by 2075. That's quite an ambitious assumption.
Ali, is it worth just mentioning how those aviation, I know it's a contentious subject, but you can measure aviation emissions in various ways. Do you want to maybe explain how they've measured aviation emissions here?
Yeah, thanks, Jude. That's a good question. So the way aviation emissions are dealt with are at UK level, as I showed a bit earlier, and what they look at is the look at all departing flights in the UK and work out how much of the emissions from those flights for the whole duration of the flight for any flight leaving the UK. The reason it's just departing flights is that there's also obviously incoming flights, but those responsibility for those emissions are allocated to the countries they depart from. What it looks at then is the takeoff and landing of those planes, but also the cruise at altitude. And so that's about the fuel they burn, but there's also additional warming caused by the water vapor, for example, that's produced as planes fly. You often see the contrails in the sky that creates additional warming. And so there's a factor that's built into this to adjust to recognise that it's not just about carbon dioxide, but the additional impacts of aviation as well. I hope that's the question to you.
Yeah, great, thanks, Alan.
Great stuff, thank you. A few bits around electrification of cars, buses and railways. Tree planting is really important as well. There's some great ambition here in Greater Manchester to plant more trees, which is good to hear, and also to restore our peatlands. And then also about waste and recycling. So reducing the amount of waste we produce and recycling more of it is really important. So I guess before I finish, I want to touch on a few individual things that people can do. So this is a little chart looking at the carbon footprint of various activities that a lot of us, or some of us may do. So interestingly, one of the biggest things, and that this isn't included in our carbon budget, is about consumerism, about the stuff we buy. And on average, that contributes about 10 tonnes of carbon dioxide per person. So thinking about what you buy and whether you really need it, it's a really important part of reducing your carbon footprint as an individual. Flying is another big area. So if you look at that return flight to Australia, that's about 6 tonnes of CO2. So that's another area where it's important for us to have a think about whether we need to fly or whether there's alternatives we can use for those journeys. Next, third highest in this analysis here is about the amount of food you eat, and especially how much meat and dairy you eat. So if you look at there, a high meat diet, it's about 2.5 tonnes of CO2. Compared to a vegan diet, it's about 1 tonne of CO2. So reducing meat and dairy is a good way of reducing your overall carbon footprint. Car use, around 2 tonnes is another area. So being able to switch to walking, cycling and public transport is a good way of reducing your carbon footprint as well. Although some challenges now around public transport use especially, but a great time to start walking and cycling if you can. So that's a little indication of the kind of things you can do individually, but these individual actions are quite a small part of the overall equation. And the real thing we have to do is persuade local authorities, persuade governments to put in place the policies we need to make those big scale changes to reduce emissions. And that's where getting involved in campaigning is really important. So I just want to close this little part of the talk around to say a bit about Manchester Friends of the Earth. There's loads of campaign groups out there. What we do is campaign on a range of issues in Manchester, including fracking and divestment as part of coalitions with other groups, so Fossil Free Greater Manchester and Frack Free Greater Manchester. We campaign on bees and also tree planting. So we've got a nature group, a nature subgroup in our Friends of the Earth group. Also do quite a lot of campaigning around transport and air quality, so supporting cycling, supporting better public transport, and campaigning against things like aviation growth, which is currently planned in Manchester, at Manchester Airport. And also we've got a little group working on waste and plastic pollution, looking at how we can do better around reducing the amount of waste we produce, recycling more and stopping more plastic getting into the environment. Well, as I mentioned, as well as working with others, the key thing for us is about engaging with politicians and councils. So it is, to me, very important that you all out there get in touch with your local politicians, let them know why this is so important to you, and let them know that you want to see action on climate change. The more they hear, the more likely they are to take action and support the policies we need. So that's it from me on carbon budgets and what you can do about it and why it's important. I hope that was useful. And if you've got any questions, then feel free to give me a shout. Cheers.
Thanks, Ali. Appreciate that. Yeah, that was a good overview, I feel, of the topic. It's as deep as you can go, I think, without having in 30 minutes. So it's not an easy topic, is it, to squeeze in with limited time, but given enough graphs, I'm sure you could explain anything in 30 minutes. So
can't be a good graph. If there's time permitting as well, I would like to say a little bit about one of the projects I'm working on as well, called Greater Manchester Community Renewables. So I don't know if there's in the last few minutes I can say a bit about that.
Yep, definitely. Yep. Do you want to carry on sharing your screen?
I'll just switch over to the presentation, if that's okay. So fortunately, my colleague Kate wasn't able to join us, but I'll hopefully be able to fill in for her and be able to do it justice. So let me just get this one up and running for you. So yeah, this is a little project that we've been working on as a group, a small group, for the last few years, and it really came about from inspired by other groups around the country doing similar things, and also a campaign that Friends of the Earth ran about trying to encourage government to support more schools to install solar panels. So unfortunately, the government decided not to do that, and so we took it into our own hands to try and support local schools in Greater Manchester. So a bit about community energy to start with. So what is it? Really, it's a way that we can help the environment and the community at the same time. It helps schools save money on their energy bills. It helps reduce carbon emissions, and it also supports learning about energy and climate change. It's a great link for schools to have a practical example on the school roof about how energy works and what it means for the environment. It also gives local people a chance to invest in clean energy in their local area. And that's a really positive thing you can do if you have some savings to invest. It's also about supporting the local economy. As an organisation, we absolutely try and use local suppliers where we can, and that's a very important part of our ethos. Part of the project as well, which I'll come to and explain a bit more later, is about the community fund that we generate, and that's a really great way of raising some more money locally to fund local projects on the environment and on climate change. And hopefully also a project like this, real examples of clean energy, can inspire other people to take action on climate change too. So how does the project work? Well, GMCR is a community benefit society. We are a for-profit, but for community profit, and so any profits going to the community fund I mentioned earlier. We raise money through share offers, and so we ask people in the community to invest in our projects. From that money that's invested, we buy solar panels and install them on schools. Those solar panels generate clean energy, which saves the schools money, but also generates income for the project. So schools get a discount of 25% on the electricity that they use from the panels compared to what they normally pay. And so that saves them money on their bills and generates an income stream for the project. That helps us pay our bills in terms of running the project. It also means that people who invest in the project get a small amount of share interest each year. And we also, from any surpluses then, as I mentioned, create that community fund, which can fund other projects in the local community. Here's some pictures of our solar arrays that we've installed. So these are 4 of our sites. So top left is a school in Odsall. Top right and bottom left a couple of schools in the Earlham area. And then the bottom right is a great little shot of the Fuse, a community centre in Partington. So those are some of the solar panels that we've installed over the last 4 years. The story so far is that we've actually managed to raise over £350,000 from our share offers so far, which is really impressive, and really appreciate all the support from local people and local businesses that have invested in the project. That's funded 350 kilowatt peak of solar panels on 9 different sites, so 8 primary schools and the community centre at the Fuse. And so far that's generated over 400,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. So look at the stat at the bottom, that's enough to make, well, that actually numbers increase now. It's over 21 million cups of tea from our solar panels, which is a great little stat. Not only that, it saved 125 tonnes of CO2 from being emitted. So that's our little contribution to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. It saved our partners £10,000 on their bills. And it's also generated a £4,000 surplus to go into our community fund. And that's helping to fund more activity at our schools around carbon reduction and actually around recycling as well. So this is, I say what happened next. This is just a little shot picture from our launch events. It's a couple of schools that are in Earlham, so Earlham Primary and Fiddler's Lane. Got the Mayor of Salford in the middle of there who came to join us. That's me in a very fetching sunshine costume. I've also got our installer Ben. So a really nice example of the kind of various people and organisations that have benefited from the project.
You didn't fancy wearing the outfit today then?
I've given that a miss today, unfortunately. So you'll have to wait for our next big event for that to happen. But yeah, it's all good fun. And in terms of what's next, our project so far has relied on the feed-in tariff, which is government support for renewable energy. That scheme's now closed, unfortunately, for new sites, but we are still keen to do more. So we're working with a bunch of partners to identify some more buildings we can install solar panels on. We have to be a bit more careful now because you have to make sure that they're high energy users and they're using a lot of our solar electricity for our project model to stack up. But we are definitely keen to do more, probably aiming for next summer if all goes to plan. So if you know of any buildings, any schools near you or community centres that might be interested, drop us a line if you'd like to volunteer to help out and help us do some of this work as well, because we're all volunteers and really lovely to come and help out. So just drop us a line via our website, gmcr.org.uk, or also on social media at wearegmcr. So thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to share a bit more about our project.
No worries, Ali. That's brilliant. Thanks for that. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, I actually had a question lined up, but it was focused on the feed-in tariff and where next, given that the feed-in tariff has ceased to exist, and I'm sure it's something which you've evidently touched on it yourself.
Yeah.
You know, is it the end for community solar projects, or is there light in the tunnel? Excuse the pun.
That's a good question. I think it's really hard for new projects now to get off the ground, and part of that is about the feed-in tariff. Part of that's also about various grants that were available for new projects that aren't anymore. I guess we're lucky in a way that we're now established. We've got those 9 sites generating electricity, and that means we've got an income stream. Gives us a bit of flexibility to do some of that feasibility work for new sites. But what the feed-in tariff does mean now, because that's gone, it means a big chunk of our income that we would have had that we do have for our existing sites won't be there for our new sites. And just so for those who don't know, the feed-in tariff is basically a payment for every unit you generate. So I mentioned those 400,000 units of electricity. We get a bit of money paid as a kind of support for our project from the government for every unit, every one of those units. So that makes a nice chunk of income to help us run the project. In future, that won't be there. So that's what I was saying, is it's quite important then for us to find schools and community centres where they're using quite a lot of electricity. And that means that they'll be using a lot of our electricity that we're generating for the panels, and less is getting exported to the grid. And that's important because when you export to the grid, you don't get much money for that. Basically, the electricity companies get it for a really cheap price, whereas the electricity that the schools and the community centres use, that costs a little bit more. It's still cheaper than what they otherwise pay, but it gives us the income stream we need to run the project. So it's going to be harder, but we'll still do it, and we're still keen to do more. So yeah, as I said before,
good to hear. And am I right in saying the cost of installing solar panels, is ever decreasing? Is that right?
That is true. Yeah, that's the other part of the equation. Definitely, that the install costs are coming down. We've seen that over the 4 years that I've been operating so far. There are lots of uncertainty right now, obviously, with things that are coming up. So the COVID lockdowns had impact on the solar supply chain. A lot of the panels come from places like China and Japan, so lots of industry been locked down over there. And also upcoming is the B word, Brexit. So we don't know what the impact of that was going to be for the import of panels, and whether there'll be tariffs and that kind of thing. So we'll have to see what happens, but definitely the trend is falling panel prices, and that's, again, over time. There is no doubt that the project will be viable again at some point. It's a question of when, and we're hoping this time next year we'll be raising money and getting more panels installed. So touch wood.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll have to keep an eye out for that. And yeah, as soon as we hear anything, we'll be sure to share that with our networks. But yeah, anyone watching, make sure you keep an eye out for that one. And yeah, if you've got any questions, Ali, I'm sure there's some contact details through through Twitter or through Facebook. I think the details are on the slides. I think you showed before. So if anyone wants to find out more, then they can do that.
Yeah, please do. Welcome to get in touch.
Cool. Okay. Well, we're just not going 7 now, so I'm gonna call it there, and wish you a good evening, Ali, and I'll see you again. Soon. I'm sure we'll catch you again. In another light in the near future. So thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and well done on this. It's been an amazing event. So kudos to you and all the volunteers. Thank you.
Cheers, Ali. Appreciate that one. You take care.
Cheers. Bye now. See ya.
Bye.